Solving absolute value equations. So this assignment will go into next week. So we're talking about absolute value. When I look at absolute value, it is the distance from zero. Okay, so I want to know the absolute value of 5. So when I look at 5, so here's 0 in respect to 5 and 0. This distance here is 5 units. And that's a positive 5. So that is 5. When I look at the, oh, I did it again. When I look at the absolute value of negative 5, again, I'm looking at, in comparison to 0, that distance here, this distance here is 5. So I know that is 5. Now here I want to know what x value will give me a distance of 5. Well, should be black. Well, here's 0. Well, I know 5. I know this distance here is 5. And I also know that the distance from here to here will also be 5. So my answer for this will be negative 5 and 5. So I would have 2 answers. So we're going to take that idea to solve equations with absolute value. Notice my x is inside my absolute value symbol. So when that's the case, I will always have 2 cases. I have the case when it's positive, so I'm going to account for that. So yes, we will have 2 equations for each one. So I have 4x minus 5 equals 8 in the case when it's negative. So 4x minus 5 equals a negative 8. So I'm just going to solve them both independently. Okay, so I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And I get 4x equals 13. Divide by 4, divide by 4. And I apologize, I did not enough room. So I get x, I'm going to put it over here. X is equal to 13/4. I cannot simplify that, and that's my final answer. No, make sure I don't drop a negative. Okay, now here, Okay, I'm going to add 5 to both sides, and I get 4x is equal to negative 3, divide by 4, divide by 4. And x is equal to negative 3/4. Squeeze it in there. And fractions are answers. We're okay. Now let's look at the next one. When I have an absolute value, I'm going to kind of highlight with this color here. Here is my absolute value. And this minus 10 is outside. So when I have like what I refer to as tagalongs, I have to isolate this absolute value first. So it's really important before I do my 2 cases, I have to isolate the absolute value first. That's super important. So I'm going to put like little eyes in here to make sure you pay attention to that. Okay. So I'm going to isolate this first by adding 10 to both sides. And now I have the absolute value of 3x plus 9 is equal to 6. Now I'm going to do my 2 cases. Case 1, when it's positive, 3x plus 9 equals 6. And I always make sure I write it down, the 2 first, and then solve so I don't forget to include the 2 cases. And now I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. And I get 3x is equal to negative 3. Divide by 3 on both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 1. That's one answer. And here I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides, and I get 3x is equal to negative 15. Divide by 3 on both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 5. So those are my 2 answers for my absolute value. And the way you'll see it on most cases, you'll see it as x is equal to negative 1 comma negative 5. No parentheses or anything. We would write it in this fashion, most likely in descending order. Okay. But if you write it both this way, totally fine. I'm totally fine with that. Okay, here I have another one. I'm going to identify, there's my absolute value. That has to be isolated first. I recognize that I have this negative in front. outside the absolute value, so I have to make sure I get rid of it first. So I know it's a -1, so I'm going to divide by -1 on both sides. And that goes away, and now I'm left with the absolute value of 2x plus 7 is equal to 16. Now I count for my two cases. So I have case 1 is 2x plus 7 equals 16, and my negative case, 2x plus 7 is equal to negative 16. Now I'm going to solve each one independently, and I get 2x equals 9. And does that give me, is that a 16? Yeah. And then I'm going to divide by 2, and I get x equals 9/2. Okay, that's one answer, and it is simplified. Improper is fine. And my negative case, I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, and I get 2x is equal to negative 23. Divide by 2, and I get x is equal to negative 30/2, and that's totally acceptable. It's already simplified. Improper is totally fine. Okay, now turn your page to page 10, and here we have absolute value equations. Again, we're going to isolate the absolute value symbol first. So this has to be all by itself. Okay. So I recognize there's a -2 and a multiplying times 4. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to add 2 to both sides. And I'm going to put this in red to remind you that's what we did first. And I now have 4 times the absolute value of 2x plus 7 is equal to 20. And I want you to think of this as like one big variable. And it's still not by itself, so I'm going to kind of highlight it. It's being multiplied, so I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides. And now I have the absolute value of 2x plus 7 is equal to 5. Now I'm going to account for my two cases. So I have case 1 is 2x plus 7 is equal to 5, and my negative case, my negative case 2x plus 7 is equal to negative 5. So now I'm going to solve them independently. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, and I get 2x is equal to negative 2. And I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 1. I'm going to subtract 7 on this one, and I get 2x is equal to negative 12. Divide this by 2, and I get x is equal to negative 6, and those are my two answers. Okay. Last one on this particular one. Again, I'm going to isolate my absolute value first. So first I have to add 3 to both sides. Okay. I don't do my two cases until that absolute value is completely isolated. Okay, I know what kind of mean. Okay, so I get negative 8. And then here is my absolute value that has to be isolated first. So I'm going to divide by a negative 2, divide by a negative 2, and I get the absolute value of 5x minus 1 equals 4. Let's see, that negative gives me a 4. I want to make sure I didn't drop any negative signs or anything. Okay, and now I have my two cases. Notice I didn't put my boxes for you, so this is where you're going to make sure you do that setup. So I have 5x minus 1 is equal to my positive case, and 5x minus 1 is equal to my negative case. And I'm going to solve them. So plus 1, and I get 5x equals 5 and x equals 1. Sorry, I missed that step, but I'm running out of room. Let me take this up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and I get 5x is equal to negative 3. Divide by 5, and I get x is equal to negative 3/5. Okay, so those are my two answers. Now let's look at the next step here. So sometimes I have no solutions. So what does that mean? So when I'm doing an absolute value, it could never, ever, ever equal a negative answer, a negative value, ever. Okay, because the distance could never be a negative answer. So in this case, they're asking what number gives me a distance of negative 9? Nothing. So none. There's no solution to this one because it cannot equal that. When I have this symbol, I can never equal a negative. Okay. Again, I have this symbol. It's isolated, and this side is negative, so there's no solution. Okay. So let's look at this one. Here is my absolute value. So before I decide that this is negative, I first have to isolate it just to confirm. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides, and I get the absolute value of negative 2x plus 5 equals a negative 16. Since this is negative, and my absolute values are here, there is no solution. So that's what that looks like. Okay, so your homework for this weekend will reflect these notes. Please refer to them. Have a great evening.